Jason Gaboury is in charge of all the chapters in New York and New Jersey, which includes us. Lucky us. And so he's here to talk about being thirsty for purpose, and then some fun facts to start you off about him. His favorite color is purple. He is wearing purple now. Now the lights are on. He used to be a professional actor for 10 years. He's been on staff with InterVarsity for 15 years, and he has 2 adorable kids. And
yes.
Without further ado, Jason Gaboury.
I'm also the husband of one wife, which is the part that he didn't say. Oh, okay, good. I have 2 daughters. I like them a lot. And typically Friday night is our homemade pizza night. And so we usually get home, everything stops about 4 o'clock, we make pizza together. I do all of the manual labor tasks involved in making pizza, so I knead the dough, I toss the pizza in the air. When the pizza falls and the dough falls on the ground, I clean it up and throw it away. But I wanted to start tonight with something in honor of my kids who aren't here. I have a 7-year-old, she's in 2nd grade at Nest Plus M down on the Lower East Side, and she taught me this little thing that she does on the bus on the way home from school. And so this little rhyme, I'm going to show it to you, and then we're all going to learn it together, right? So it's this little rhyme, it goes like this. Happy llama, sad llama, mentally disturbed llama, super llama, drama llama, big fat mama llama, moose, alpaca, moose, moose, alpaca. So, you guys can do this too, okay? So get your llamas, right? Get the llamas out. Okay, we all have to say it together. So happy llama, sad llama, mentally disturbed llama, super llama, drama llama, big fat mama llama, moose, alpaca, moose, moose, alpaca. Okay, now we're going to speed it up a little bit. Here we go. Ready? Here we go. Happy llama, sad llama, mentally disturbed llama, super llama, drama llama, big fat mama llama, moose, alpaca, moose, moose, alpaca. One more time. Happy llama, sad llama, mentally disturbed llama, super llama, drama llama, big fat mama llama, moose, alpaca, moose, moose, alpaca. Okay, good. Awesome. You guys are awesome. That was amazing. So now, if you're just bored, or you're in a biophysics class or something like that, and things are droning on, you can go. I live in New York City. A couple of years ago, there was an ad on the New York City subway system, and anybody from New York, the greater New York area? A couple of us are from the greater New York area. So you might have seen this. A couple of years ago, there was this advertisement taken out on buses and the New York City subway system that said, over 1 million New Yorkers are good without God, question mark, how about you? Right, or a period, and then the was followed up with, how about you? And it was a campaign that was put on by kind of a new atheist campaign. It's kind of somewhat typical of the new atheists. And I'm a nerd, and if that wasn't obvious, I'm enough of a nerd that I actually love multi-textured meanings, like puns and jokes and things with multi-textured meanings. And so I actually kind of appreciated the new atheist campaign because it's kind of a multi-layered thing. On the one hand, it was a challenge or a kind of a critique of the classic moral argument for the existence of God. You guys know the moral argument for the existence of God, kind of aware of that. But the moral argument for the existence of God basically goes like this. It says, if there is no transcendent reference point for good, then all of our then we have no basis for any moral action, right? So if there's not a transcendent good, if there's not a good that's bigger than my opinion or your opinion or my culture or your culture, it's not just that moral action becomes relativized in that context. It's that moral action is actually impossible. You can't have an action that's really good unless there's a transcendent reference point. Does that make sense? And so the idea behind this moral argument for God basically says all human beings, whatever our culture is, whatever our background, whatever relative ways we see things, all of us know fundamentally that there are things that are good and things that are evil. We all can kind of, there's things that we can all kind of put to and go, it's not just a relative thing. We know, for example, it's not good to sexually exploit people, right? We know, for example, you shouldn't kill people. We know, for example, that it's not a good idea to imprison children, exploit them, right? So we can say these things, if we know that these things are wrong, that these things are evil, then we can't, but we can't know that that's wrong or evil unless there's a transcendent reference point. And so what it says is, well, if you have a point of view, if you have a viewpoint, if you have a way of thinking, a basis on which you're thinking that leads you to a conclusion that you know isn't true. So I have this viewpoint, all truth is relative, there is no transcendent reference point, so good is just whatever you make it, right? There is no good, there's no ultimate good or evil. The problem with that is that most people can't function that way. Society can't function that way, and most of us have a deep sense of there are some things in the world that are just plain evil, right? When Coney was giving children machetes and telling them to hack each other to bits, right? There's parts of us that go, that's just evil, that's just wrong. And because we know that, if we take a position and that leads us to a conclusion we know isn't true, experientially we know it's not true, if philosophically and morally we know it's not true, then the idea is, well, of course, then change the presupposition, right? It can't be that there is no God. That in fact, there's got to be a God. There's got to be some kind of transcendent reference point. That's the kind of the moral argument. Well, this campaign actually takes that argument and flips it on its head and says, well, lots of people are good without God. And it kind of makes fun of this argument playfully, but it also kind of does it in two directions. On one hand, this campaign was saying you can be good without a transcendent reference point. But the other thing that it did, which I thought was interesting, was it sort of, you could read it another way too, which is, I'm good, right? I'm good without God. How about you? So there's you could be good without God, insert, meaning you could be moral without God, but also you could be good as in it's all good, right? You guys does that make sense? What's interesting about this is that when it comes, so I found the campaign interesting, and I kind of chuckled at it every time I saw it, because I would think these little goofy, nerdy thoughts in my head, and of course the problem is, what's interesting about them is, and it's true of a lot of the new atheist kind of critique, is that it just kind of asserts these bold statements and kind of shrugs its shoulders and shrugs off this idea that, oh, sure, we can just throw off goodness, we can just throw off the existence of God, and there's not really any there's not really any existential consequences to that. I actually think that's a very shallow, thing to do both philosophically and morally. We can talk about that. But anyway, the problem, of course, with this campaign from an existential point of view, from a theological point of view, from a moral point of view, from a spiritual point of view, is that when it comes to the big questions of life, like morality, like purpose, like meaning, actually what we experience, what we see, what we know, what we can observe about humanity is that it's far more complicated than that, isn't it? Right? Voltaire famously said, described the human condition with these great words. He said, tormented atoms in a bed of mud, devoured by death, a mockery of fate, but thinking atoms, whose far-seeing eyes, guided by thought, have measured the faint stars. See, Voltaire, who, by the way, was no fan of religious faith at all, he understood that human beings, we need more than food and sex and shelter and money and power and honor and acclaim, actually to live a true human life. His idea is he could see that even though he was not somebody who believed in God, that he could see that human beings were tormented atoms and tormented by the fact that we actually needed something beyond ourselves. We need something beyond food, shelter, sex, money, power, honor, and acclaim to really, truly live lives as human beings. It's actually an observable fact that human beings need purpose or a meaning and purpose and need to answer these big questions. And we need this as a species as much as we need air. Right? Any of you dog people have dogs at home? Any of you cat people? Okay. You have a pet or you have dog or cat, and any of you have no pets at all? Okay. Oh, bad crowd to do this. Okay. Imagine for me you have a pet. I don't have pets either, so I'm with you. But imagine you have a pet. Think about a dog for a minute. As long as you give your dog shelter from the cold and food and attention and the other things that dogs need, right? What does a dog do? If it's well fed, well groomed, well cared for, it falls gently to sleep, right? Content, happy, peaceful. The dog doesn't have any angst, right? Dogs don't sit up at night being tormented. Maybe cats do, but I don't think so, right? And there's this interesting thing about human beings that make us different from dogs and cats and animals. That we actually need meaning and purpose and these big questions, and we need them to be answered. And if they're not answered, we kind of freak out a little bit, don't we? Right? There's these parts of us that, in fact, these parts of us that kind of get angsty and get unsettled and get depressed and get stressed out. In fact, one of the striking things about college students these days is that there's an extraordinarily high number of college students these days who are on antidepressants. Did you know that? It's amazing if you think about that rationally for a moment, because you think college students, many of you are in an environment where all of your basic needs are met, right? You have food, you have shelter, you have people to talk to, you have resources, you have opportunities to get to know people, and yet, despite the fact that all of your basic human needs are being satisfied by a structure of the university at one level, we have deep, deep angst. We have existential angst. We have these big questions, and we need to answer them, and we need to answer them, or else it's very hard for us to imagine a way to go on living. In fact, Erwin McManus expresses this idea. Or McManus is a pastor, he expresses this idea. Why do we need meaning? Why do we need purpose? He says this about our condition. He says, you are a unique creation made by God to live and not simply exist. Your soul, your innermost being, longs to fulfill its ultimate purpose, and it will not rest until you do. Your soul craves its destiny. Your soul desires, and it always will. You were created to be a creative being. You were created, made to grow, to dream, to achieve. Your soul is letting you know that you come from God, and your life is intended to be God-sized and God-inspired. The writer of the Gospel of John also understood this dimension of humanity and why. And that's why he uses an absolutely loaded phrase, philosophical phrase, at the beginning of his gospel. He says this, in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God. The Logos was God. He was in the beginning with God. And through him all things came into being. Without him not one thing came into being. And what came into being in him was life. And the life was the light of all people. And the light shined in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Now this term that he uses, logos in Greek, literally translated means is word, and that's what you get if you read it in English. But in John's context, it meant so much more than just literally like word as in a piece of language that signifies something. It referenced the idea of logos in the first century was this philosophical term which referred to the purpose, the reason, the logical coherence behind existence itself. And many philosophers, many scholars and philosophers during that time had struggled so much to try to figure out what's the meaning, the purpose, the goal, the rational coherence of the world and everything in it, that they, by the time that John was writing the first century, had just given up on trying to find this meaning and try to identify it. And in that context, John takes that word and he knows exactly what it is, and he throws out this incredible claim about the way the world is. He says, in the beginning, Logos. Logos with God, Logos was God, Logos at the source and purpose of everything. You have this idea of this Logos, which is at the center of everything. And John is dialed into this idea that's reality that all of us long for. Our longings, actually, tell us something about the nature of reality. And sometimes the claim is made towards spiritual people that you got to be really suspicious of your longings, that faith and things are just kind of wish fulfillment, or just kind of projected desires and those kinds of things. And actually, it's interesting that we would apply that in the world of faith and the world of spirituality, but we would never apply that in other areas of life. For example, your desire for food, your longing, your hunger, your longing for food doesn't point to the idea that food doesn't exist, right? Your longing for food is actually connected to the fact that food really does exist. Anybody eat today, right? Right? So you had a hunger, and it drove you to something specific, something concrete, something real, something tangible. Your desire for intimacy, for friendship, for connection with other human beings says something about the nature of what it means to be alive, right? It would be very strange to have a longing for connection and intimacy if we were completely isolated, autonomous beings that didn't need anybody else, kind of like cats. Right? And so what I would submit to us, and what John submits to us, is actually our longing for purpose, our longing for these big questions, meaning, purpose, identity, the other things we've talked about, that those longings that are inside of us point beyond themselves to the God that we were made for. They point to the very real existence, the very real and tangible existence of the Logos. And what John says is the Logos was God, the Logos was with God, the Logos was God. The Logos is the source and meaning of everything. And it's very real. So now, here's the question. If it's very real, and we all need it, and it's a concrete referent that may be transcendent, but it's concrete, it's actual, if that's true, then we have another question that emerges in the midst of that, which is, why then is it so hard to discern or figure out what your purpose in life is? Has anybody figured out their purpose in life, by the way? No? Not yet? Okay, good. It would have been fun if somebody raised their hand. I remember waking up early in the morning. My daughter Malaya is a morning person. And I remember coming in one morning, she'd taken over the kitchen table, and she had covered it with paper. And her face was about this far from the table. She had all the crayons, all the markers, and I think at this point she had a whole bottles of paint out, and she was literally just painting like James Pollock or something, covering the table. I said to her in my groggy morning experience, "Ate, Malaya, what are you doing?" And she said, "Papa, I am an artist." And the confidence with which she was just covering the table with her artwork was amazing. There is something, if you think about being 5, if you think about back when you were 5, or back before you were in school, and you just were sitting with that box of Crayola 64. Anybody have the Crayola 64 crayons? And you were coloring your world, man, and you were just there, and purpose was a little bit clear. But as you get older, it seems further and further away. It's elusive. And so why is that? I think there are 3 really good reasons why. And I want to run through them quickly, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions. But here are 3 reasons why I think it's very hard for us to come up with and discover what our purpose actually is. Here's the first one. Desire for purpose is fuel, not destination. I'm going to say that again. Our desire, which makes it so important for us to actually get into this idea of, or understand what does it mean to have purpose and to move forward towards purpose and discover that. Our desire for that is fuel. It's meant to drive us in a quest, in an epic quest, to discover what we were made for, to discover our ultimate purpose, to discover God, to discover meaning, to discover creation. But the problem is that oftentimes we have two problems. We either mistake the fuel for the destination, or we think that because of all this fuel that we have, all this desire, the dissonance that gets created because we've got lots of fuel and we're not there yet. All right? So let me unpack those. Any of you ever play, the first one is the idea of you got a lot of fuel. So at this point in your life as a college student, my guess is you spend a fair amount of time thinking about what you're going to do, right? What you're going to be, what you're going to become. In fact, you probably spend some time thinking, what am I going to study? What am I going to major in? You know, what am I going to do? What kinds of jobs am I going to be prepared for? Who am I going to marry? Or maybe 50% of you think about that. You know, but you know, you're thinking about these kinds of questions, and you've probably got a lot of energy that actually goes into those decisions, right? Goes into that thinking. Is that right? Is that fair? You got some energy going around. The easy thing is to do, when you've got a lot of energy, can you imagine anybody drive? Can you drive? Can you imagine getting into a car, putting it in park, and then flooring the gas? What happens?
You don't go anywhere. You just wasted a lot of gas.
You waste a lot of gas, right? You waste a lot of gas. The engine starts screaming at you, right? The engine's like, ah! You know, the thing's going. Well, it doesn't literally make that noise, but you know, it literally, the engine's revs are up, and it's really loud, and it's probably, you're wasting gas. It's not good for the car. That's a intense situation. If you've got a lot of fuel, if you've got a lot of energy, the temptation is to feel like I've got all this energy, and I've got to resolve these questions. I've got to resolve them quickly. But perhaps I want to submit to you that it's actually the way to discover purpose. Or one of the reasons that it's hard is you got to take your foot off the gas a little bit and trust that the energy that you feel in terms of figuring these things out is actually an indication that this isn't something that you're going to discover tomorrow. This isn't something that you're going to discover next week. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's actually a process, a journey that you're going to go on for some time. And that's why you have all that emotional fuel. Does that make sense? Another way to think about this is, anybody ever play hard to get? People are giggling. I don't know what that means. Okay, so for those of you who don't know what hard to get means, there's this wonderful Shakespearean line where Romeo and Juliet, you with me? You've seen the movie, heard of it, read it once in class. Famous love story. Juliet has this fantastic line about, she says, unless you think me too easily won, I will, if you think me too easily won, I will put on a sour face and I will, speak. Essentially, she says, I'll speak crudely to you. I'll speak meanly. I'll reject all of your advances because the one thing I don't want to be is I don't want to be too easy, right? Why did she do that? Why did you play hard to get if you did that? So,
Are we supposed to answer that?
You can, yeah. To test loyalty, yeah, okay. I think you play hard to get to test the other person's true intentions, right? Are you willing to invest the time, the energy, the effort, or am I just a passing thing, right? Is this worth it? Is it valuable? Is it really important? That's what you're trying. And so, if you've ever played hard to get, well, anyway, the desire is for purpose is not meant to be satisfied quickly. It's actually meant to be discovered over the course of a lifetime. It's meant to be engaged with over the course of a lifetime. And that's why there's so much energy, but sometimes we think, oh, well, it's not discovered, I haven't figured it out, it's not today, it's not all cohering, and then we get frustrated by that, and we get discouraged. The other thing is we sometimes confuse fuel with destination. And we think, I have a desire for acclaim, I have a desire for success, I have a desire for intimacy, I have a desire for romance, and so I have a desire for wealth, I have a desire for resources, whatever those things are, and we think, that must be my purpose in life. Now, because we're good Christians, probably we don't actually say that very much. But actually, isn't it true that most of us, at some level, operate according to, well, my real purpose in life is actually to do well in Cornell, so that I can get a good job, so that I can make a fair bit of money, because then I will be, and then I will be, right? Right? So there's this script that plays out in our mind, and even though we say, oh, no, I've got all this, I want to discover the purpose that God has for me, and the one person that God has for me, and all, I want to discover my purpose in life. Yet there's this script that says, that it takes this fuel of purpose, right? The desire to have these big questions resolved, the desire to have stability, the desire to have intimacy, the desire to make a meaningful impact. And we turn the fuel, which says, I need relationships, I need resources, and we make those the destination. And as soon as we do that, we cut ourselves off from purpose, because we focus in, and the fuel becomes the destination, and we're just burning up. We're just burning up the resources just like we would if we were sitting in the car with our foot to the floor and we're in park. That makes sense? So that's one reason why it's hard to discover. The second reason it's hard to discover is we actually need each other in the process. The hard thing, though, is we need each other to discover purpose, and we need to be able to engage in these kind of conversations so we can discover our purpose together. But the problem is that it's really hard to talk about the things that really matter, isn't it? Right? I mean, do you have how many of you, if you're guys, right, I'll talk to the guys for a minute, like, how many of you, if you're guys, sit around with other guys talking about, here's what I really, 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 really care most deeply about. Here's what really deeply matters to me, guys. Can you imagine that? I mean, it's terrifying, right? Most of us would rather have a root canal than, have that kind. And even for women, I suspect that even though sometimes stereotypically women have a easier time connecting relationally, I suspect that at your heart of hearts, it's really hard to share the truth of, this is the truth I am. I have known a fair number of women in New York City, and maybe a little older than you, and it's hard to get married in New York City in certain circles, and I've known a lot of women who are kind of mid-20s, and they thought they would be married by now, or they thought they'd be in a relationship by now, and all the guys seemed to be out to lunch, and I've known, but the ability of a woman to sit down and say, I am lonely, I am really wanting this, I want a relationship, I want connection, I want intimacy, and I'm struggling with that. The ability to actually just come out and say that is really difficult for some. And so it becomes really hard for us to share this. In fact, John goes on to talk about this, the need for community in terms of finding our purpose. He says, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. So what John has to say about, not only is this purpose a real tangible entity, real tangible thing, that the purpose of existence exists, it's a reference, it's there, and our longings point to the reality of it. But he also says we don't know it unless other people help us discover it. Do you see what he was talking about? There was a man, he came from God, his name was John, and he came to point the way, to say, there he is. To say, there it is, understand it. And we as human beings, we need each other to point the way, to say, this is the way this is the way to discover purpose. And we need to be able to do that. But that is a hard thing to do. That's why it's so great, by the way, that you have communities like this, where you can actually ask some of the hard questions, and you can actually engage in real conversations about what it means. And you cannot be judged and not be concerned about that being an unsafe thing. Here's a third thing that we do, and this makes it hard for us, almost I would say impossible for us to discover purpose, is that actually not only do we find it hard because we confuse fuel for destination, not only do we find it hard because we need other people, we find it hard to discover purpose because we actually reject the source. And it's not only it's not just people who are not religious who reject the source, but Christians, we do it too. Every time we live out of a script for our lives that puts money or success or satisfaction or relationship or family or anything else and says, if I have that, that will make me happy, that will give me purpose. As soon as we do that, what we're actually saying is, in the beginning was the purpose, the meaning, the reason for my existence, the thing that holds the universe together, that purpose which I'm meant to discover. And as soon as I say, oh, it's actually really fundamentally about me getting whatever, having a family, having a job, getting a fellowship, having a family, having a spouse. As soon as we do that, we cut ourselves. We reject the source of our life and our purpose. And it makes it impossible for us when we do that to really discover who we are, what we're meant for, and how we are to move forward with that. Notice what John says in this text. He actually says, to all who receive, he says this, he was in the world, that is the Logos, that one through whom, in whom, around whom is the purpose, the Logos, the center of purpose. He came into the world, and even though the world was made through him, the world did not know him. He came to his own. And his own people did not accept him. His own people, who should have recognized, did not accept him. And so there is a dark tendency in all of us to actually know that there's a divine purpose and reason for our lives, and just to say, you know what, I'm going to build my life around the small things that I think I can control. Around the small things that I think my education or my culture or my family or my upbringing or my smarts or my gifts or my abilities can create. And I create a small little bubble of control around my life, and I reject the very source of life and purpose. That's what John is saying. He said he came to his own, and his own did not receive him. His own rejected him. So finally, where do we find purpose? I have two more questions. Where do we find purpose, and how do we know we've discovered it? I've already kind of answered this question. Where do we find it? We find our purpose fully, ultimately, in the person and work of Jesus Christ. In the one through whom all the purpose of the universe is held together. In the one by whom, through whom, and in whom is light and life and the light and life of all people. Interestingly enough, I talk to Christians and people who aren't Christians all the time about God and spiritual realities. And I ask people from time to time, do you want to know do you ever guess what the first commandment God ever gave to people? Anybody want to take a guess at what the first commandment was God gave to folks? Sorry? Be fruitful and multiply. Right? Eat lots of good food. Make lots of babies. Right? In a word, God's first command to people is live. Live fully. Thrive. Thrive and be healthy and be full and be well and care for each other and care for the planet and care for this world and open it up and make it beautiful. Amazingly, that's not what most people think of. Most people think that God's first command something has to do with, stop being bad, right? Our purpose is found in the one whose goal and desire for us is not some kind of subjugation to a set of arbitrary laws or arbitrary rules. The rules and law of God is kind of like guardrails. I was driving up to your lovely city of Ithaca and I noticed some guardrails on the winding roads as I came up. And I was grateful for the guardrails, right? Because the guardrails are there to keep you from going off the cliff. And going off the cliff means death and destruction. God's moral law is like the guardrail on the side of the road. The point isn't to look at the guardrail. The point is to keep from going off the road and crashing and dying. Because whoever put the guardrail up there was not interested in guardrails. They were interested in life and preserving life, right? And it is the same way with God. We find our purpose by knowing and discovering God, who is rich in love and desire. And the problem is, one of the desire for us to thrive, and one of the major problems is that we don't trust this God. Because we somehow suspect that God's out to control us. He's out to not give us his best. He's out to somehow limit us and make our lives smaller and less satisfying. And the first thing that God says to human beings He creates is live, thrive, be. We don't trust that. And until we begin to not only know this God as He's revealed in the person of Christ, but actually trust Him with our life, we cannot discover a purpose. Because our purpose for us as individuals and us as a human species has everything to do with the purpose of our Creator, the purpose of the one who spoke life into existence and created us. So that is how we know our purpose. Another way the other picture to think of as you think about whether or not you can trust a God like this is to think about the image of Jesus on the cross. Jesus, in a very real way, lived the with God life that none of us trust God enough to live. He lived the with God life that none of us actually have the willpower to live, actually have the courage to live, actually have the love to live. And in the midst of that, despite that, what we said was, to heck with you, we'll kill you. And we rejected him, we killed him, and stretched his own flesh between heaven and earth, stretched between heaven and earth. You know what God does and says? His own flesh being broken, having been beaten, having been rejected, having been spit on, the whole crowd screamed for his death. You know what he cries out from the cross? He doesn't cry out, damn them all to hell, those evil people. He cries out, Papa, forgive them. They don't know. They don't know. They don't know what they're doing. And his own flesh ripped from heaven and earth, he's still saying, forgive them. He's still saying, I will give my life so that they can have life. And by rising from the dead, he actually demonstrates he's got the power to do that. He's got the power to transform a life. He's got the power to transform your life. He has the power to transform any life. In fact, what the death and resurrection of Jesus point to is the fact that he has power in himself to give to anyone who will come after him. It's not going to solve all of your questions about purpose today, tonight, or tomorrow, but it's an invitation to trust somebody who's willing to split their sides open in love for you. Now, last question is, how do you know you've discovered this incredible love? This incredible purpose. How do you know you've discovered purpose for your life? And here's the spiritual truth about this whole question. I've been tap dancing around it, but I'm just going to say what I have to say about this. You know that you've discovered purpose in life. You know that you've discovered the purpose that you were made for. The way that gets actualized in your life is when you are able to give your life away. When you are able to, there's this profound spiritual truth in the Christian tradition and in other traditions as well, but it's particularly poignant in the Christian tradition. You know that you've discovered your purpose in life when your life becomes less about you and more about giving your life and your gifts and your abilities to the work of God and to your brothers and sisters. In fact, the best-selling book on purpose that was ever written in English. Is a little book by a pastor out in California. You know, the first lines of the book On Purpose is the best-selling book on purpose in the world. The first lines of the book, first sentence of the book is, "It's not about you." Ultimately, the spiritual truth is life, we discover our purpose, the more that we hold on to our lives and try to control our futures and try to control our destinies and try to control the more we hold on, the less and less life we have. But yet, the more we give our life away in trust and obedience to God, give our life away in trust and trust and obedience to God and to Christ and to His purposes and His work, the more we give ourselves to each other, the more we give ourselves on behalf of other people around us, the more life we have. And that's just a profound spiritual truth. We think that discovering purpose is primarily figuring out the answers to questions like what should I study and who should I marry and what's my vocational calling. And the reality is that God's call through Christ and God's call through His law and God's call through the Scriptures and God's invitation to us is far more about knowing Him, giving our lives to Him, and giving our lives away so that we might be filled up with purpose. We might be filled up with mission. We might be filled up with something that's worth giving our lives for. And this is the spiritual truth that we are invited to consider. I was had a great dinner conversation with a couple of us here just a few minutes ago, and we were talking about this very idea. That actually, if you want to grow your sense of purpose, you want to grow your sense of closeness to God, you want to grow your sense of faith, you want to grow your sense of spirituality, the best thing you can do is actually give it away. Do you believe that? I mean, so many people think, oh, I don't have a lot of faith, I don't have a lot of spiritual knowledge, I don't have a lot of biblical knowledge, I don't have a lot of ability, I don't have a lot of compassion for other people, I don't have a lot of this, I don't have enough. The very best thing, you want to be more compassionate? Give the compassion you have away. Start serving people. Start caring for people. Make sacrificial choices that say, I'm going to care for you, and I'm going to care for you with what I have. I'm going to give that away. And you know what you'll find that your compassion grows and you'll have more of it to give away. You want to have more faith? You want to have a more robust, rich faith? I dare you to do evangelism. I dare you to get out there and start sharing the faith that you have. I dare you. You know why? Because as you step out and you share what you do have, that suddenly you discover it's beginning to grow and stretch and reach out. And you discover as you step into that actually the purpose, you discover more and more, this is the purpose, this is how I'm discovering what I was meant for.